Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com, thechrisvossshow.com. Come here, a blog post we want to share with you, of course, to be the latest in social media and technology. Be sure to give us a like, subscribe to us on YouTube, tell a friend to take and watch us. You can see all the wonderful reviews we do as we get all the major phones and gadgets from all the major tech companies. And we're going to be reviewing today. We've done a number of reviews on these phones. The AT&T Samsung Galaxy S4 versus the HTC One. So this is going to be really cool. Both these are from AT&T. Say hello to our friends at amzn.to for sharing the phones with us. Be sure to watch for other carriers and other phones that we're going to take and review. But we're going to do these with a full benchmark comparison. We're going to rock through a whole mess of benchmarks. You're going to love what you're going to see. And of course, be sure to watch our other videos that we have where we put these two babies head to head, along with several of the other phones that we have that have come out last year. So be sure to watch those videos too. Let's go to it. Let's see who wins the battle. Okay, so now here you can see the Ice Storm Comparisons version 1.1. This is the 3D Mark app, and it's a great app for testing out all the different performance, especially of 1080p screens. You can see here the score on the S4 came in at 11,063 against 10,498 score on the HTC One. You can see some of the breakdowns of the individual scores in each of the different tests that it did: the Ice Storm score, graphics score, physics score, graphics test, physics test, demo, all that sort of good stuff, frames per second, in what it would take and perform. What was kind of interesting is the HTC One showed actually over here in this performance, this is just some results that they've put back in here, showed much higher than the one that we're getting on our current phones, so keep that in mind for whatever that may do. And of course, this was done with the 3D Mark app test. Okay, so before we get started, let's talk about what software we have updated in both these phones, because as more updates come out, you of course can have different versions and different performance, etc., etc. So we'll benchmark this first with what software we're using. So on the Samsung Galaxy S4, we're using Android version 4.2.2, and on the HTC One, we're using the Android version 4.2.1, HTC Sense version 5.0. You can see the software number there too, if that's your thing. We can also flip to the baseband and kernel version if you want to take and keep track of that as you're doing comparisons along with us at home. Okay, so here we've run the AnTuTu benchmark test version 3.4 of the Android app that's really good at being able to test and keep scores and everything else. You can see here the benchmark came out on the S4 at 24,406, and on the HTC One came at 23,641. Now, the S4 is probably usually always going to beat the HTC One on speed. It does have a faster processor, so keep that in mind. Okay, so here you can see the score on the Samsung S4 is coming in at 29,808 against 23,870, which was what we're using for the HTC One. This is a scoring system. You can see how the scores and numbers broke down here. This is basically the, let's see if we can get back to it. This is basically the benchmark and tuning app that you can download off the App Store. Okay, now here you can see this is the billion counter app test, and what this does is count how quickly each of these devices can count to a billion. Now you can see here that the Samsung S4 has done it in 11.035 seconds against 16 seconds with the HTC One. Okay, so here you can see we're using the CF Benchmark Pro version 1.3, and in here we've run a full benchmark test. Now you can see as we page this down, you can keep track of some of the numbers if some of this stuff interests you. The main thing that we're really looking for here is the overall scores in comparison. So on the native score, you're getting 29,615 against 29,770, and Java score 24,546 against 22,074. Overall score 26,573 against 25,152. You can see that even though the processing score isn't quite as high, the processor isn't quite as fast in speed as the S4 on the HTC One, that it still holds pretty good its own in keeping in tight range. You can see here the overall comparisons of both devices, sometimes pulling in the other scores. Okay, so here you can see the display app that we're using to test the displays of both these devices, and you can see them side by side at 100% brightness. I can tell you that I like the colors much better on the S4. The green is much richer, much thicker, much more vibrant in its looks, as are the other colors, the red, the magenta, and the blue, and everything else. One thing that is interesting is I can see a whole lot more light blue in this area on the HTC One, where I can't really, it's all just kind of bleeding together over on the Samsung S4. So take that as you will for whatever it may tell you. But it does look like there's a more distincter separation of colors. Like I can see more yellow up in here with the HTC One, where it tends to blend all together here in its display. So there's a comparison display. Okay, so here we're doing a GPS status test. We're testing how many satellites each of these phones can take and pick up. You can see here on the GPS status, there's 21 in view on the S4 and 18 in use that it's using to determine where it's at. The HTC One is having a little bit harder time right now. I'm not sure why. 21 in view and 16 in use, and it's got an accuracy of within 30 feet of itself. Now these tend to vary depending upon where you're at, what gets picked up, etc., etc. So it's just kind of an interesting benchmarking app to see how well it does. You can see the S4 definitely appears to be picking up stuff a lot stronger too in its signals. Okay, so now here you can see the Geekbench 2 scores that we're getting on both these devices. This pretty much falls in line with what we normally see out of each of them. The Samsung S4 coming in at 3240, and the Geekbench 2 on the HTC One coming in at 2763. This is pretty much one of the biggest things that I use to define the benchmarks of speed of devices. And of course, the big cheat here, of course, is that the Samsung S4 has a faster processor speed to it. So you can see here the integer scores, how they break down, the floating point scores, the memory scores, and the stream scores. We can compare some further information here, of course. So you can see that the Samsung processor is a 1.9 gigahertz, one processor, 4 cores, against the Qualcomm Snapdragon 600, 1.73 gigahertz, one processor, 4 cores. So that little bit of gigahertz juice makes all the difference. You can see here the memory comparisons between the two. Okay, so here you can see we've run the Passmark Performance Test mobile app, and in comparing between the two of them, the system got 3401 on the Samsung Galaxy S4 and 2643 on the HTC One. And you can see the breakdown of these scores. We're going to go ahead and page down a bit. CPU tests. You can see the CPU test on the S4 was 15,015 against CPU test for the HTC One 6,307. Now, I'm not sure why that's so low. That's kind of interesting, those numbers. Now, sometimes these apps aren't geared for the individual phones themselves, so it could be that there's some of that going on. But both these phones have been out for a bit, and so have these apps, so that's kind of interesting. Disk test, 7877 on the S4 against the One, 5765. Memory test, 3098 against 2724. And 2D graphics test 25 against 1962, 3D graphics test against 1067 and 953. Okay, so now here we're using the Passmark benchmarking performance app, and you can see here that the Samsung Galaxy S4 is coming in with a 12,480 number, and on the HTC One, 12,141. You can see some of the other breakdowns of some of the other comparisons of the phones there. Okay, so now what we're using here is the RL Benchmark SQL Lite Performance app, and what this does, it runs a number of different processes within the phone. You can see here the number of processes it runs, and it gives different scores based upon how many seconds each phone takes to run the applicable stuff. The overall score on the Samsung S4 came in at 17 seconds and 0.257. And 21 seconds, 0.826 on the HTC One. So definitely not faster on the Samsung S4. Okay, so here you can see the scores that we got with the Malamo app for benchmarking. Now, I believe the lower score is the better score that you want to have. This processes how fast each of these can do their browsers and process data through HTML5 and all that good stuff. So usually the lower score is the better one. On the HTML5, it came in at 2185 for the S4. On the HTC One, came in at 2418. And on the S4 for metal, which is a feature that the Lamo app takes and processes with. They call it at 730 against 761 for the HTC One. Okay, so here you can see we've done the KFS benchmarking scores on both these devices. And let's see here, we've come in at, on the S4, we've come in at 31 frames per second. And on the HTC One, we've come in at 20.156 frames per second in the numbers that it's taken and run. Okay, so here you can see we've done tests, of course, with the AT&T phones. Each of these are on the AT&T network. And, of course, your results are going to vary depending upon where you're at and how much coverage is in your area by any applicable different provider. So you can see here some of the results. It does look like the HTC One actually did some faster downloading and not really faster uploading, faster downloading than the Samsung S4 in this case. These can, of course, vary. It's just always interesting and a crapshoot. And I don't use these for benchmarking much because they're really pretty much predominant on which cell phone service you're using, et cetera, et cetera. But people do like to see these, so we'll roll these out for you to take a look at. Okay, so all in all, both these phones are wonderful phones. I don't think you can really hold anything against either one of them. I do know from the extreme usage I've had with both of them, and I have both these phones in our possession thanks to AT&T, that the Samsung S4 outperforms it, but it's very slight, and so it really depends on what you like in a phone, et cetera, et cetera. You can see other comparison reviews that we've done of both these phones, so you can get a deeper understanding of which one we think is the best, and you can choose and decide amongst yourselves. I think they're both great phones, great potential, and definitely they have their fan base. So you can go to AT&T.com, that's AT&T.com, our good friends that loan the phones to us. Check out the Samsung Galaxy S4 and the HTC One, which is really cool. And also, please give us a like. Subscribe to us on YouTube so you can get all the latest and greatest. We have all the major phone companies sending us phones, and you definitely want to keep up on all the phone video comparisons that we do, from everything from Android to iPhone to BlackBerry. Thanks for coming by the ChrisVossShow.com. Be sure to watch our other videos, and like I said, give us a like, subscribe, and tell a friend if you would. We'd certainly appreciate that. Thanks for coming by.